We want to thank all of you for coming today to the CARLA presentation series. We thought it would be nice to be able to do this via Zoom. We usually do this face-to-face on the University of Minnesota campus, and the wonderful thing about doing it online is that we get to have all these colleagues come from all over the US and the world today, so we're really pleased to have you here. My name is Kate Paisani. I'm the director of CARLA. So we are just delighted today to have Mel Engman and Mary Hermes present their work on Indigenous languages and working with the land and the land as an interlocutor in their research. Mel is a graduate of the PhD program in second language education here at the University of Minnesota, and she's currently a lecturer in the School of Social Science, Education and Social Work at Queen's University Belfast. And Mary is a professor in second language education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Minnesota. And the title of their talk today is Land as Interlocutor, Transcribing and Analyzing Material Participation and Interaction. So I'm going to pass things over to Mary.
Miigwech, Kate. Thank you so much, Kate and Karen, for having us today. Like I said, this was a first for me to do this. And I had 3 presentations scheduled in the month of March that were national in-person presentations. This was one of them that was meant to be at AAAL. So this is different, but people who maybe would not have been at AAAL are here today, and I'm grateful for that. So, Bujun and Dinawe Magani do Guabishki Migwa and Indigenous cause Nagignin do dame Nindunjaba Odawa Zaga Egarin Midash Nindamin and Ma Gakabikang. Thanks for coming, all of my relatives. It's good to see you. We're going to talk about some exciting stuff. Hope you think it's exciting too. Mel, you want to say a word?
Buju Maligman Indigenous cause. Gawin and Dudu Demasin in Shimukumanakwe. My name is Mel Engman. I'm descended from settlers. I'm from the Great Lakes region of the US. I now live in Ireland. And I'm really excited to talk about this with Phong too. This is the product of years of research and collaborating. I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks,
Okay,
Mel.
So,
I'll do the little translation for myself. I'm like Kate said, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota. I'm in second language and culture, but I'm also in curriculum and instruction. And my bigger identity is that I'm a mixed heritage person of Native and Irish and Chinese descent, and I'm a community member at Toohey, where I've been interacting in different ways for over the past 30 years that I've lived there. So I have a foot in both worlds. Today we're going to bring those worlds together in a presentation called Land as Interlocutor, Transcribing Material Participation in Interaction. So this is a methodological innovation that we made through our NSF documentation grant, which is now, we're well into the analysis part of that grant. And there's a lot of things we want to share about it, but we're going to focus on the methods today and what made us make certain moves. We're Indigenous and white, so there's a bigger team I want to recognize. There is, you want to go back for a minute? So here's where we are, so you can settle yourselves. The Ojibwe Nation is very large, and what's not on there are all the resettled communities in urban areas, which are actually equally as large. The nation spans Canada and the United States, and it's a very large language group, although through colonization, tribes have been divided into each individual nations. So there's some division within the Ojibwe language learning movement. It's scattered, it's dispersed, and it's large. So we work in revitalization, sort of all the levels, down to teaching language and making language software, thinking deeply about people, how learn, and then going back to elders, communities, and doing work that's a little bit deeper theoretically and about documentation. So we work the levels. Okay. So this particular project, we affectionately call it Forest Works. It has a big long name in the NSF, Documenting Endangered Language Projects. Here's the number if you want to look it up. Our idea was to make this project itself an act of reclamation. So sometimes language documentation, I would say maybe often coming from a linguistics perspective, looks at an idealized speaker and wants to capture one speaker. That's been sort of the model. Capture a speaker, capture their very best language, capture it in specific settings. Usually those settings are isolated from any kind of context. So we've been thinking a lot about land because that's where Indigenous thought is. A lot of Indigenous scholars are talking about land as pedagogy and our connection as land and language coming through the land. And so we were trying to bridge that. We're trying to bridge that and the fact that I've been involved in Guerrettaz. I was one of the founders early on. For the first 5 years I was director. And actually since I left, they've had great growth. Maybe something to do with my leaving, but they've sort of taken off and has become a well-established foothold for revitalization and are actually really creating very highly proficient second language speakers. So when we started this research, we started it in 2016 with a pilot. And then in 2018, I was on sabbatical and I was actually housed at Guerrettaz for a semester where I was doing various things. But one of the things was this. So it wasn't through the school, but through knowing the kids at the school and knowing the families in the community that we were able to ask them to participate. And they were all for it because we said, would you like to go on a walk in the forest with an elder and speak Ojibwe? And we're a point of view camera. And the point of view camera was a huge selling point for the kids. Yeah, this is cool. Research, that's cool. What are you going to do? This is so cool. So we had a great response to that. And we felt like through that, our documentation project was actually, we made something, an act of revitalization and reclamation, elders and kids walking in the forest. We made that happen, whereas it normally wouldn't have happened, or it might have happened, but we made it happen in a bigger way by having this series of recording and movie events where we brought elders and kids, and community members came too to bring food and support and hang out. And so that was nice. So that was in itself an act of reclamation. So some of our ideas come from, we're not doing a theoretical framework, but I'll just mention some of our ideas come from Indigenous epistemology, like Leanne Simpson, Marker, Watt, Kehete, thinking about the land and taking the land very seriously. And of course, I've been talking for years in conversation with Megan Bang and Ananda Marin, and they do work in English in urban settings, walking on woods, and it's part of a much bigger native science reclamation project. So our idea initially, do you want to go back to the, I'm just going to introduce the walks right now.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So the idea was to have the elders and the children go in dyads or in triplets, small groups for a walk. We didn't tell them what to talk about. We said, talk about anything you want, walk for about 20 minutes and come back. And they were point of view cameras and solid state recorders, and we did not go with them. So we're going to show you, before we get too far into this, we're going to show you a clip so that you see what we've been looking at for years now. The elders, Joe Nakwanabe, and the two youths, Manidood and Dialogic, they want to use their real names. They want to be known for the language work they're doing. And we ask you to look at this and say, what does reading the land look like? What sort of skills, frames, knowledges, questions, meaning making do you see in this one minute clip? So it's an Ojibwe, but use all of your senses and immerse yourself in the forest and see what you notice.
Oh yeah, oh.
All right.
So then here's the triple view.
That was the view from the elder, and we'll show you what happened when we splice the point of view cameras and how different that looks. We'll do that one now. I didn't see anything. Okay. All right. So this is our attempt at interaction. I don't think we're actually going to do a chat right now, but we want you to say, what did you notice, not knowing the language? Or maybe some of you do know the language. That'd be very cool. But what did you notice about the intergenerational communication, about collaboration and embodying, the revoicing, the mimicking, the interaction with the forest that wouldn't have happened anyplace else, the sensory engagement, and the kind of questioning, hypothesizing, evidence gathering and comparison and inserting that they did. So this little clip was rich with interactive communication. And, oh, good. Chat will be visible. Great. You can chat those in if you like. So while this walk is about, while our research is about taking land seriously in documentation and taking the agency of land, trying to turn that into a methodological thing, it's also about the interaction between all the actors, including land. So these are the challenges we were faced with, and the wealth of material. You can see it's data rich even in a small clip. All right. So the opportunities and challenges, I mean, we were just floored that we had an intergenerational opportunity. We don't know of any Ojibwe documentation between elders and children. So although this is children who are second language speakers, we get a sense of what the interaction might have looked like or will look like now going forward. It's extraordinary that I want to just uphold the success of the school and the families and those people in the trenches doing the language work, the kids. It's incredible that we have this rare moment. Joe is in his 70s. We don't know how long we'll have first speakers and young children who are second language learners to even be able to do something like this. The technological affordances is that we can document now in different ways. The point of view cameras, the solid state makes this mobile in ways that documentation hasn't thought was possible. Documentation was sitting in the most pristine, isolated, soundproof setting. So usually that's not going to be walking on land. So now we have equipment that allows us to get those kind of conversations, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. It's just that it's not part of the repertoire of documentation. The interaction on land is complex and layered. So we talk about multimodal. We draw heavily on Goodwin and learning sciences. And we think a lot about people who have been working with multimodal and language as culture for a long time. And we actually want to think about what possibilities are there that we can see that we wouldn't see. If you look at the transcript for this walk, for example, it's very flat and you won't know anything that's going on. It's all referential, it's all deictics, it's just all pointing to, it's so contextual. So the kind of language we get, because it's highly contextual and the land is so involved, is completely different than an abstracted conversation or a narrative. So we know that academic research and the containers that it's in, the disciplines that it's in, has long been used to control and dominate and extract knowledge. So now we're thinking about resisting that and putting knowledge back into the community. And what is it that revitalization communities need? Well, if we're trying to restore intergenerational transmission, we definitely want to hear intergenerational transmission in everyday context. So that's some of what led us down this path, down this forest path. Okay, I think I have a little more to say, then I'm going to switch over to Mel. You want to jump in anytime, Mel? So for this paper, we're really looking at the big methodological challenge, is how do we fit these ideas of multimodality and land as our relative into colonial academic epistemologies and connect with those conversations. How do we reconcile what we see going on in the wild in language and what's important there to traditional tools, so flat transcripts and flat academic articles, which are not looking at videos. They are somehow getting the feel of a video from describing it in a 2D surface.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I can add, it's difficult. We've been thinking it's like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, and we don't want to do that. We actually want to, we don't want to just try to put Indigenous ontologies and epistemologies in this colonial frame. So we're trying to instead stretch the frame and make new meaning. This is our primary research question, how are learning and knowledge constructed through intergenerational language use on and with land? And that comes from this whole project and what we're trying to do at this moment in time. But you can also see that it generates a lot of more narrow questions around what learning looks like, human and non-human interactions, manifests in language use, and the kind of language that's used. Ofang, back to you with a theory.
Okay, so we have lots of theoretical ideas. So we have Indigenous epistemologies. So taking as a starting point that we have relational epistemologies, not hierarchical relationship with land. So the nature-culture divide, that we are not above. So a basic colonizing principle that humans are above and distinct from all of the rest of nature is questioned in Indigenous ontologies and epistemologies, that we are actually just another part of a big fine web, and that our expertise is distributed among that web, that everything that is here, we are actually relatives, and we need to be respectful relatives, not better than relatives. And that something about time and space and bodies changes. So as opposed to a Western linear progress of history and a kind of a social Darwinist evolution, there's a different sense of time and bodies that Wildcat and Deloria talk about that I'm just trying to get my head around. So we have that as a backdrop. And then we have another idea that is very strong in reclamation, is that culture and language cannot be separated. So that culture is made through interaction. So here we have the colonial divide of language and culture, separate disciplines. We have linguistics, we have anthropology, we have second language education, we have culture education over here. So really the idea that comes from Indigenous epistemologies, and especially in the revitalization movements, elders telling us over and over again that culture and language are intertwined. And then we connect with Goodwin here, who also believes that culture is in the making, in the language, the gesture, all of the material environments that shape the interactions. So that's a nice connection in terms of thinking about discourses and culture. And the land is intra-actor, meaning this is an intersection of feminism and Indigenous land epistemology, that land is so intertwined to our identities and meaning making that we shouldn't really look at the individual as the locus. It's really what happens between the individual and the land, the individual and other individuals. That's the point, the unit where we should be focusing our attention on meaning making, not one individual. Okay, so those are some of the ideas: new materialism and Indigenous epistemology and multimodal interaction, learning sciences stuff have come together. You can read more about that. There's more there. Okay, so we started in 2016 with pilot walks. We were granted a endangered language grant, which I told you I carried out, or we carried out, Mel was there too, in May of 2018, where we did most of the walks that are in this archives. So they're intergenerational groups. The walks varied. We said 20 minutes, but people don't keep track of time when they're walking in the woods. So they varied from 10 to 90 minutes. One group got lost. And we're all on Anishinaabe land at Lekutare. The other people involved are grassroots Indigenous multimedia. We have a language person there, Jordan Flata, who transcribes. Kevin Roach managed data. And lately we've been working with James McKenzie and Macy Ning on the analysis. So the participants and procedures, I told you that these were all bilingual youth from Wadukadading, ages ranging from 9 to 12. The first speakers were not from Lekutare. One was from Mille Lacs, one reservation over. The other two were Gabe is from 49th Angle, and Harvey is from Red Lake. They had point of view cameras, and they offered on their own accord, just like as a normal thing, we're gonna put tobacco out before we go on the walk. Didn't instruct them to do that. We told them to go for a walk, but in putting out tobacco, they're offering to the land that we are participants here and the Anishinaabe are still here. So that was kind of just a normal, look, we're Anishinaabe doing this. This is how we're gonna start the walk.
So now I'm going to take you through the analysis step by step to kind of bring you into the point of methodological reckoning and then how we kind of got through it. So first of all the walks were logged and transcribed and translated in Elan software. And it was primarily our Ojibwe language specialist at Grassroots Indigenous Multimedia who did that, working with elders. And this is an example of what Elan looks like. So you can see you can sort of see the videos, and you can also then type in the Ojibwe and the English below. And then once all the data were entered into Elan, we exported it to a text file as a transcript. And this is what the transcripts look like from Elan. And as you can tell, it's really just focused on language as, but so anyway, if you look at these translations, you can see there's all this, the there and this and that's when, and that's normal in conversation, when you're sharing a place with someone, that's something we naturally do. But in a transcript, that makes it really hard to know what's being spoken about. And so, especially without a wider accounting of that perception. Well, so I can tell you as you're getting the view up, in stage 2, that's when we started to add those nonverbal elements, such as gesture and gaze, because we know this is all part of language and interaction. It's so much more than spoken words between two human beings. So we expanded the transcripts to include a broader range of elements of meaning making. And that involved, rewatching all the movies again with a very close attention to the extra-linguistic and paralinguistic cues. And we also included detailed descriptions of gaze and gesture and other embodied actions on the land. This made the transcriptions much longer. And as you can see from looking at this little excerpt, you can tell what they're talking about when they use reference like it without actually naming the reference. So it was easier to understand, but still compared to the dynamic 1-minute video we showed you, these are pretty flat. Okay, so yeah, now we're on stage 3. Thanks, Fong. So this is our third stage of analysis. This is what we would call our methodological reckoning. And you can recall our research question about learning and knowledge constructed through language use on and with land. And the transcriptions we showed you, they don't help much. We see some language use on the land, but there's nothing really with the land in those transcripts beyond its materiality as a static object, a branch, some fern shoots, a rock. And also, those indigenous ontologies that are our starting point are not visible in those transcripts. We're building our inquiry on notions of flattened hierarchies and distributed agency, and that relationality across interactional elements. And so, and is only evident in the transcript as far as stage 1 or stage 2 is this sort of material fact. And so we're spending a lot of time worrying over this and thinking about how can we capture the role of land in this return of intergenerational language use to its place. Okay, you can go to the next slide. I'm hoping everything is on this. Okay, good. So we gave land a turn, and that brought up new questions like, how do we represent land then if we're giving it a turn? When does it speak? How do we know when to include it? And Fun, can you hit the arrow once more? I think an animation will pop up.
Here we go.
So here's what it looks like. So we shifted the transcription to include the verbal and the nonverbal, and you can see the L in that sort of column right before the verbal. L stands for land, and that's an instance of sort of latching. The land is latching with the youth speaking before it. So there's some questions now. How are we actually deciding when to give land a turn if we're going to do this? So can you go to the next one?
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, so this takes us to Charles Goodwin's theory of cooperative action. This was helpful in answering those questions about how to include land. So Goodwin says that humans use language and other things to build action with one another. He says we can create new things out of parts, and we can reuse things that others have already made to make something else that's new. Fawn, can you hit that one more time? Great. So this example of Tony and Chopper, this is taken from Goodwin. This is something he's been using for years to illustrate this concept of cooperative action. And what you can see in line 1 is the guy Tony says, "Why don't you get out my yard?" And that's an utterance that's made up of words, which are parts. And then you see Chopper following it with, "Why don't you make me get out the yard?" Again, an utterance made of some words, some parts, which came from Tony, and they're sort of transformed and reused in Chopper's utterance along with some new parts to build action, to build action on top of Tony's action. So Fawn, can you hit it one more time? Thanks. This is an example of what Goodwin calls substrate, which is really just a general term to point to whatever the participants are using as a point of departure for transformative operations that creates new action. So Tony's utterance in line 1 is the substrate. It's the jumping off point for new action that Chopper does in line 2. And Fawn, can you hit it once more? So it makes the past relevant to the present, and it frames the future. And also Goodwin says it doesn't need to be language. Okay, you can go to the next one.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so this idea of substrate is really helpful for us in determining when to give land a turn in the transcript. Land can be two things. It can be either the substrate, or it can build action on another substrate. Goodwin calls this an interstitial object. So we're going to show you a couple of quick examples to show how we have interpreted land to do each of these things in interaction, and we'll show you what the transcript ended up looking like. Okay, you can go to the next. Okay, so I'm going to first show you an example of what it looks like when land is the substrate. That means land is just acting as a point of departure for further building action. And you're going to see Nawagijik, one of the kids, his point of view as he walks the land. His gaze falls on a pine branch on the ground. He stops and picks it up. And that's it. So Fawn, you can go ahead and play that video.
Okay, hopefully.
Hopefully. Oh, this is layered. You have to delete. There we go. It's working.
Oh, yeah. Whoa. No, hindi na kadigin.
Oops.
That might have been tricky to see, but if you go to the next slide, I can show
Okay.
what that looks like. Okay.
No, hindi na kadigin.
Okay.
There we go. So that really just the, you can click it once more. Sorry, I guess I made it animated. I don't know why. So you can see N is Nawagijik in line 1, L is land in line 2. And in the video, you know, Nawagijik bent down and picked up the branch. This is how we would have transcribed that video. You can notice that the column on the far right, dialogic interaction. So we're not only transcribing verbal and nonverbal, we're also then asking ourselves to think about the cooperative action as we're doing this. So we created that column to sort of track the action and to the land's role specifically, kind of to check ourselves. So this transcript reflects the movie you just saw. Dialogic orients to the land, and the land provides a visual material contribution that ends up organizing subsequent turns in the interaction. This means that land is functioning as a substrate. It's a point of departure for more action. And you can see that in 3, Dialogic asks, Ani no. This dialogic interaction is reinforced in the language. The referent for that demonstrative pronoun, no, it doesn't appear in prior talk. The referent actually comes from the immediate visual and material environment of the land. So although the land isn't producing audible talk like the humans are, the land and the youth are interacting via turn-taking, and they're interacting through physical sensory engagement toward meaning making. Swan, can you go to the next one?
Oh.
There's my animation. So clever. Okay, so I'm going to show you a second example, and this would be, the first one was land as a substrate. We can also include land in the transcript when it's building. And Goodwin called this an interstitial object. We'll just call it an interstitial phenomenon, meaning it's not the jumping off point, rather it's building on that existing substrate. So in this clip, you'll see Money Dude finds a little cluster of fern shoots growing out of the forest floor. He picks one, suspecting it's a fiddlehead fern or a wagoggan, but he brings it to Joe just to check. Joe's the elder. He asks the question, Mina wagoggan, is it a fiddlehead? And after he asks this question, there is a long absence of talk. It's nearly 10 seconds long. There's also very little nonverbal action. They're not moving around a lot. They're not gesturing. Their bodies are quite still. Yet when you watch this movie, you will see that there is clearly action being built with the fern, not just on the fern. Okay, so you can go to the next one or show the video, I mean.
Yeah, show the video. Oops.
Spoilers.
No, wagoggan? No, wagoggan? 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 No budge. You
guys there?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is the breakdown. This is how we would transcribe that movie. Again, if you look in the sort of the third column, L is land, J is Joe, M is Money Dude, and N is Dialogic. And on the far right, you'll see that column attending to the creation of action or the building of action. So as a dialogic interlocutor, land can also build on previous action. It's interstitial phenomena. So in line 12, you can't see what comes before it, but I couldn't fit it on the screen. But land is building on Money Dude's question, Mina wagoggan. And so then in line 14, we see attempts at sense making around the fern shoot. Both Money Dude and Dialogic are looking at it, and they're looking alternately at the shoot and they're looking at Joe. Now, if you notice the verbal column for lines 14 through 17, there's no talking. Yet there's interaction, intra-action. We see 10 full seconds of interaction. Joe is holding the fern shoot. He's rotating it between his fingers, and the kids are watching. They're observing the shoot. They're observing Joe. They're observing Joe observing the shoot. And Joe's sustained attention to that shoot, his careful turning of it in his fingers, and the kids' close attention to it all. They're evidence of reading the land. So in line 16, we transcribed a turn to account for the land's participation as a collaborator in this group endeavor. It is contributing to building action, to answering back to this nonverbal inquiry that it's getting from the kids. Okay, we can go to the next. Okay, so all that substrate business, that's all part of our third stage of analysis. And it not only helps us answer the research question, but it also speaks back to that methodological reckoning that we've been having to do. If we use Goodwin's idea of substrate to understand how cooperative action works, then we can clearly see a place for land in interaction. Land is not just a backdrop of human meaning making, like we often think about when we talk about like environment, or sometimes about material context. Land is an interlocutor through these intergenerational walks in the woods. It's taking part in the interaction either as the point of departure for cooperative action or by building on previous action. You can go to the next one, Fong, and I'll pass it off to you.
Okay. So currently, we're using this approach to take up questions of forest land as a living language learning materials. So we're working on a piece for MLJ that's all about materials and what does it mean to interact with materials in a learning situation in language. We've been working on the role of silence and wondering how, and we're actually starting to rethink that after yesterday's meeting, that it looks like silence, and silence is indexed as nothing happening in a classroom. Although in this case, the silence, it's full of cognition and thought and group attention and meaning making and different gazes that kind of show that. It's between all of the participants, including the land. So we're really curious about that, since silence has been sort of a stereotype in American Indian education. Oh, the silent Indian, and the work in the 70s about cultural discontinuity, that silence is an indicator of nothing. So we're wondering what productivity and thought and teaching and learning actually go on in silence. We have a bunch of examples in this set of 3 videos. So the videos out of the 14, we've been looking closely at 3. They're all Joe's walks. We had to do that. We wanted the elder to be a constant for one thing, and we just needed to narrow the data set in order to be able to do the micro-interactional analysis, because it's so time consuming to look at just a 1-minute clip. So we narrowed it to Joe's for this first round, and then we selected for 4 themes. One was performance or gesture, one was cycles, one was silence and wondering, and the last one was storying. So we found quite a few examples of them referring to traditional stories or telling everyday stories, and how those fit well and what that means with reading the land. So we're thinking through that. And the last finding is what Mel sort of intimated in the first slide, that this is beyond sort of just Ojibwe language learning or reclamation in a narrow sense. There's really a lot of implicit pedagogies going on here. We see one thing we're working on right now in Joe's walks is how his role as elder is not just elder as speaker, which sometimes is what happens in reclamation communities. And even with Joe on the first walk we did, we say in Ojibwe, you hire someone, you give them tobacco, and especially elders, and it means something to them what you're asking them to do, or you're hiring them. And Joe is used to being hired to be a speaker, to be an orator, because he is one of a few first speakers. So on the first walk, he just talked the whole time, and he didn't have any interaction with the child. So when we came back, we said, Joe, you don't have to talk the whole time. You can talk about whatever you want, but you don't have to talk. You can also interact and see what comes up. So that's the second, third, and fourth walk we're working with. And on those walks, we saw his role shift from one of sort of being a speaker to this one who uses silences, uses stories, and usually will put the onus of learning back onto the learner. So he never lectures, he never says, this is a feather pole. He'll say things like, if the boys look at the feather pole and are interested in it, then he follows their interest, he follows their leadership, and says things like, oh, why would you do that? And then they talk about, from a point of experience, what they did and why they did it. So we see these pedagogies that are not sort of the teacher-directed discourses, and that are like a huge contrast to that. And yet Joe very much is still the expert and the knowledge holder and the respected elder. So that's been pretty interesting, and we're just getting into that. Let's see, anything else?
Oh, there's more. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I talked too long.
No, you're great. There's not that much more. This is all important.
We want a discussion too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out that it's important because we're talking so much about Goodwin in this paper, I want to make sure that I point out that our read of cooperative action is a bit divergent. It's not quite the same. Goodwin says that non-human phenomena can be considered substrate, but he doesn't afford them turns of talk. You know, he uses things like a hopscotch grid or a Munsell chart as substrate in his work, but they don't get turns of talk. They're simply static material objects. He also says that cooperative action is something that people do. And he says that it has the extraordinary ability to endow human history with its unique accumulative power, that is something progressively shaped by a consequential past while remaining both contingent and open-ended. And Fung, if you can hit the animation button, this is actually the point where we really diverge from Goodwin, because an Indigenous perspective would ask, hasn't nature been doing that all along for eons? Okay, so yeah. And Fung, if you want to, take this one.
Okay, so our read of Goodwin's cooperative interaction diverges by saying what we started with in the theoretical framework, that we're giving animacy and agency to the land. And so we're translating that now into academic work that uses transcripts that actually do that, so that we can see the layers of accumulative power that are entangled in documentation work that's on the land. Anything else here?
We just have 2 implication slides. So I'm going to extend the implications to the role of land in language interaction research. Because the argument for including land in the turn-taking process doesn't just come from our alignment with orientations to animacy and personhood. We have to include land in the turn-taking because its participation in those interactions around inquiry and wondering and knowing is required. Our data show that. And so I think this is especially significant for language reclamation efforts. I love verb paradigms. I like language nerds. We love that stuff. But this is so much bigger than that. Land is so incredibly significant to language reclamation efforts, and ecological knowledge that's grounded in experiences and relationships, stories and inquiry. All of that supports language. And then language in turn can support all that knowing and relating. So I just want to hit home that those connections between language reclamation and land run very deep. And there's one more slide. That's you.
Okay, so the counter evidence, this is a counter evidence against the nature-culture divide, obviously, and even tries to push that a little further. So we think about Quigley and how he says that language is entwined in land. And so we're trying to further that idea. So it aligns with reclamation perspectives. And, you know, if the uptake of this is to be doing language on land, that's fine. I mean, that has always been a part of a lot of people's reclamation ideas, but language in classrooms and language in buildings with tables and blackboards or whiteboards has become more the standard for language teaching. So we are just trying to open that up and say, what are the implications for reclamation of doing language on land? And what does it mean that the elder doesn't have to just be the speaker? How is the land itself elicit participation? So the land-based encounters and the interactions and relating and learning and knowing, we think are important. It involves the learner in very significant ways that perhaps classroom interaction falls short in. Okay, is that it? That's it?
That's it, yeah.
Okay, we have 10 minutes, so I'm gonna stop sharing so we can see each other.
Couple of questions in the Q&A. So if you could just read the question, because the rest of the attendees can't see the question. So if you could read the question before you respond, that would be great.
Do you want me to read a question?
Sure.
Okay. So Corey asks, I'm still working to put this question into words, but how did you determine what land was doing in its turns, like its communicative purpose? I notice you say things like to address question. How did you determine this too? Did it require looking at the next turn to decide the land's turn? Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Fong, or do you? Okay, sure. So that's something we're working on now. So we definitely, context mattered so much because we kind of like worked back and forth in time within these interactions. So we'd have an episode and then we tracked the dialogic interaction. And so once we saw that attention was sort of, or that action was building, we would have to trace it back to figure out where the substrate was. So it was always like a turn ahead, determine what happened to the turn before. But in terms of what the land is doing beyond either acting as a substrate or a building action, we don't really always know. In fact, we've talked about this in our meetings that we're now saying that the land is taking a turn, but we don't know what it's saying. You know, we put screenshots in there to show that to hold its turn, but we don't know what it's saying. It's not, we don't have the skills for that.
That's right. And we didn't pick video clips because land was taking a turn. We picked video clips from themes that we were working from. Some from high-level themes. We looked through the episodes and then we picked clips from that to focus on for micro-interactional. And then we would do the transcripts, the third layer of analysis with the land. And we're still doing that. So it's not a perfect process. It's definitely experimental, but we did find, especially in the Waagagan clip, we showed you what a difference it made, probably to the person reading the transcript, the person reading the article, to see that land gets a turn.
Yeah. Do you want to pick a question? There's a lot now.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I think, how do you determine, Darren asks, thanks for the talk. Thanks, Darren. I've missed this, but can you explain how you determine how land built action? Just moved away. How you determined land built action. I'm understanding it as a departure point, but I'm clear about how it responds. I imagine it can be subjective. Mm-hmm. Do you do anything to mitigate that?
Yeah. So again, context is really important, and it's interpretive. You know, just as even transcription of language can be quite interpretive and dependent upon who's doing the transcribing. It was all based on the context. So there are many times where land isn't in the transcript because it's not really a part of the shared attention frames. Within our transcripts, we organized each walk into episodes that were based upon shared joint attention. And so as long as land was being sort of directly addressed or like directly sort of interacted with by when it was part of the assemblage around that like shared joint attention, like around the Waagagan or around the feather pole, that's when we were able to focus in on when it was contributing to the action. So it's definitely interpretive. You know, it's not like a binary. Maybe we wouldn't all agree on when it is, but that's what the dialogic action third or the final column on that transcript was meant to help with too. It was sort of like a way for us to calibrate that we were looking at and seeing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And we don't want to anthropomorphize the land and
right.
say as if, you know, this is what communication looks like from a human point of view, but for the land, we're just, you know, giving it a spot and we're trying not to say too much or try to interpret what it's saying. That would, I think, go too far.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to pick a question, Mel? There's 6 of them. Yay.
Yeah, sure. How can we consider freshwater and ocean as actors? That's from Mora. Fong, what do you think about that?
Well, that's what the water movement has all been about, you know, the land as our living relative and how are we treating the land. And I mean, it seems like, you know, we can definitely consider them as actors. I don't know how it would look in a transcript. I'm not sure what you're thinking. Maybe similar. If there's interaction where participants are on the water and building, we do have actually one where they're at a lake and they're talking about the lake. So when there's gesture, silence, picking up the water or picking something out of the water, those would be times when the water would be an interlocutor.
And also land was like a sort of a catch-all for sort of like all the non-human, other more than human relatives that are part of the interaction. So yeah, water would have been included in this method, but part of the reason we did this is because it addressed our research questions directly. So I guess if we had these same research questions around freshwater and ocean, then we would likely include it with land in a similar way, but it would depend on the research aims too. It could be done.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of when I'm out with my partner, when he reads the water all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He reads the waves, he reads the wind, he reads the directions, he reads all kinds of things that I don't even see in the water. So he is definitely interacting with water and reading the water. So I think there's lots there. It's just like not something that I am that familiar with. Should we do one more question?
Yeah.
Someone has a question about, Rebecca says, do you think land as pedagogy methodologies could ever be used to recontextualize language materials collected through colonial or academic endeavors or epistemologies? So materials that are geographically removed from Indigenous lands, or would this be the square peg into the round hole?
So I think I'm interpreting this to mean like maybe revitalization, like documentation from long ago, like maybe documentation from missionaries or something. Is that maybe what they're thinking? Like academic endeavors that now we have all this language data. Is there a way that we can take maybe these archives from like a Christian mission 100 years ago and use land as pedagogy methodologies to kind of bring it home?
Yeah, in the marker 2019 paper I just recently read, 2018 or 2019, he actually does that, and he talks quite a bit about the colonial archives that they have and how they're actually, this is what we have, and they're all about land, but it's kind of missed in the way they're transcribed and in some of the interactions, and because it wasn't what the documenters were after at the time. So I forget how he talks about, a decolonial move using those archives. And I see we have some archivists on the call and some documenters. So I might open it back to them. The land as pedagogy methods. That's interesting. So then I think you're asking to take some of the things that were done long ago, some of our best records of speakers, and recontextualize them into things for language learners using land, more interactive with land. Is that correct, Rebecca? It's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I would like to think about that more, just in terms, and we are thinking about that actually in terms of what could we do with this with this corpus. How would it move into, and what are the design implications for language materials? And we're really, thinking about a lot about that now. So I haven't really thought about in the past how you would use some of those narratives or stories, or I don't know that they were collected on land, but I think they were collected about land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. We have a lot of really interesting questions, but unfortunately we don't have any more time to answer them. So Mary and Mel had provided their contact information on the last slide, and but we want to thank you for your thoughtfulness, the audience, for your thoughtfulness and your participation. And I want to especially thank Mary and Mel for their great presentation and for modeling how to handle technical difficulties with grace and good humor. So thank you so much for that. And thanks especially to Mel for being here all the way from Ireland. We really appreciate you, and to your work on Indigenous language learning and revitalization. And just thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. And we hope to see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thanks for your questions. Be in touch.
Yeah. Miigwech.
Thanks for coming. Miigwech Biajag.